Hello, everybody. So welcome. Um, the plan for today is that I've been talking with some folks who were curious to know more about GitHub Copilot and if it's helpful or not when working with Business Central, what the experience of using it is like, and what are some of the scenarios that we might see the benefits of it and where that's helpful. And since it's a national holiday here in Sweden, I decided, hey, you know what? I've got a bonus day. A number of my customers have the day off as well today, so then let's do something fun. Let's dive into trying to make the use of Copilot and build an extension. So what we're going to be doing today, and I'm checking my notes, so if you're wondering what I'm looking off at, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to look at the Copilot ecosystem when it comes to Business Central. And what I decided to do on this was give a real experience of say, okay, well, let's take a scenario here. I've invented a clean coders company that will be creating a cleaning company within Business Central, just something to work off of. And here's the scenario we're going to try to see how Copilot can help us build a basic extension. We're going to set it up so that customers can have offices that potentially need to be cleaned. And each of these different offices should support a cleaning schedule and support different services that would be provided as part of that contract. All the offices are billed monthly. And we need to have an API so that our Power Platform people can potentially create a website that makes it very easy for customers to cancel or reschedule dates. So we want to test making an API for this logic as well. And we also want to have event hooks to note when things are posted and all that fun stuff. So I felt like this was a good example scenario for us to tinker with of building an extension from scratch that covers a variety of different tasks. We're going to create some new tables. We're going to create some business logic. We're going to create some processing routines that work off of that data. We're going to create an API. We're going to create some event subscriptions. So I feel like this is a pretty reasonable approach to take on what we're going to need to do. So to that end, I have freshly spun up this morning a brand new Docker image, which I'm sure is, yep, nicely logged out for us. Brand fresh new Docker image that I set up with as a Business Central evaluation company. So that is up and running. And let's see here. I'm just going to make sure I'm keeping an eye on chat as well in case folks have feedback. So we've got that set up. I've got my Visual Studio Code environment all set up with a workspace running the latest version of Visual Studio Code. I am kind of a nutter in that I will, generally speaking, run edge cases and betas and all that sort of thing. So at the moment, I am using Visual Studio Code Insiders, and I am using the GitHub Copilot nightly build at the moment, along with a whole bunch of some of our various friends that we've accumulated along the way in the extension ecosystem. But I'm currently using GitHub Copilot nightly. This updates, as the name implies, pretty regularly. Most people would be utilizing the GitHub Copilot extension. Very similar, just updates on a more controlled release basis. So to talk to what we've got so far, I've created a basic app workspace where we have an app JSON all set up. We've got our symbols. We've got the basics of the Visual Studio Code best practices of different things that hopefully most of you are pretty comfortable with, like setting prefixes and things. We've got let's take a look at our workspace settings just for folks who are curious. So we've got a shared symbols path. We've got our different folders set up in the ecosystem. We of course have Waldo's extension to help us make the file names make sense. A bunch of code analyzers. We're doing this as a per tenant extension. I'm not trying to make this app source compatible. That's a whole nother tutorial. I recently asked in a launch event Q&A if the package cache path now supports multiple paths as an interesting sort of side note, but it finally seems to be behaving nicely in having a shared uh, relative path naming structure. It is not requiring to be absolute. So now I have nicely a single symbols folder for both of my different extensions, plus some fun stuff from Andre's keeping my code tidy sort of things. Later today, I'm going to stream a separate session round 2. I wanted to split it up so that if there's any technical problems in our first one, because this isn't pre-scripted, I haven't done a test run of all this logic before. So we'll see if we drive this car right off a cliff. We'll see. But the afternoon session, if all goes well with this work through, we're going to do round 2 of okie dokie. So now we have theoretically a bare minimum viable product for an extension that provides this functionality. Let's do some testing. And how much does Copilot help with the testability side of writing code a little bit faster? I know Luke would probably like to hear from me that I'm doing the testability before I'm writing the code. But I will say that this has been a place where a lot of the people who are slowly coming up to speed on testability are being forced to do it afterwards. So I figured this would be a good reflection of real world experience for folks. Okay, well, with all that said and done, we now have some objectives in front of us. We have to, hello to Spain, seeing comments flowing through on different platforms. So the first thing that I get asked a whole lot when we're dealing with Copilot is, does it cost? Is there privacy considerations? What are the things that I should know about it? The first answer to that is Copilot comes in a couple of different licensing forms. If we actually look at our GitHub Copilot page, let's drop in here on this one. There is a new Copilot coming soon that is going to have more functioning features, but that is in waitlist status, so I'm not quite through the waitlist yet. There is a couple of different things to be aware of. One, you can sign up for a free trial to use Copilot for yourself, and then there's Copilot for Business. Some of the benefits to using the business is that you can do organizational level policy to make sure that it's not potentially pulling from public code, and then it will mostly learn off of what you're writing, which is kind of cool. I have gotten the question of, is there concern about Copilot is being trained off of what I'm writing? And my answer to that is I'm okay with that. So you have to decide with your organization if you're okay with Copilot learning off of what you write, and developing and growing your based on your skills. But my general take is if I hire a new person in 6 months or 3 years from now, and Copilot helps them write better code to better best practices because I'm training it today, that's a good thing. So, but if you are concerned about Copilot on particular projects and you want to use it only to explore in hobby mode, and then sometimes you want to shut it off, there is a little button in the taskbar that just says, you know what, I want to deactivate Copilot right now. And you can decide that you want to put that disable into the JSON. Nice and easy. Now it's part of this project of the code in this solution is too sensitive or too proprietary that I don't want Copilot looking at this particular workspace. You could do that. I'm obviously not going to disable that for our walkthrough. Okay. Well, hopefully that answers a couple of the early questions that people might have. And now let's dive in. I'm going to skip a lot of the best practices that I would usually use of using some of the different snippets, of using some of the great wizards that come from extensions. I'm going to try to treat this very much like if I were just sitting down with Notepad and Copilot hanging over my shoulder, what is that experience going to be like? I'm also not trying to architect a final product. So there are some different elements where maybe I would break some of the app into multiple applications to make it more code compliant. I would write a lot of the testability first, all of those fun things. But I just wanted an idea to hang it off of. So we're going with that general theme of things. So going back to our clean code company, wrong slide. Um, our five main objectives are we want to have an office entity that is much like a ship to. It's going to be per customer. We need to potentially have address info, various master data that would be normal to have on an office location. Maybe we would have like hours, key number, various pieces of info like that. So we're going to need to create some master data associated with that particular new subsidiary table. We're going to also need to set up some information that ties to that customer and office record, because the primary key on our office entity is going to be tied to an individual customer. Lots of different ways you could architect this. But we are going to set up a schedule system in advance. And we are going to, this calls for, we need to bill some services for each of the different potential things that a customer has selected for that office, which suggests we need some setup information of what are the services that they could potentially choose from. And the next one of there's going to be a monthly billed contract. That's going to be based off of some total price of the services selected. So the service info needs some price info. Okay, well, that gives us the architecture of our rough requirements. Cool. That's good. And then the API and event hook stuff should be in comparison fairly little. So yeah, let's drop that out of the way. And our first stop is going to be, let's create a folder for office information. And we'll go ahead and we're going to just create a new file. And I am using the rename functionality of the Waldo's CRS extension. Be an AL file. It's going to get renamed to whatever. So we're going to create a new table, and it's so hard not to use every little snippet along the way here, including things like ID Ninja and everything. So we're going to be working in the 76,000 range. Okay, let's see how much Copilot learns on this one. And we're going to call this customer office. Okay. Now, Copilot is possibly thinking about stuff. There it goes. Okie dokie. So all I did at this point is I created that I want to make a table called customer office. Now, the autocomplete is the first thing you really notice with this, because that's effectively what Copilot is that it is really context-aware autocomplete, which for those of you who are used to typing on your phone, that probably sounds like a horrible idea. But the cool thing about this is that it inferred a whole bunch of stuff that came along with that. It inferred that we're going to potentially have lots of data classification on here, that it's probably going to be customer content. It did so a little unnecessarily, that we're labeling it at the table level and the field level, but it did infer that we need to have a bunch of fields, and that I'm going to, because I named it customer, it went, oh, okay, somehow or another you want this to involve the customer number. It didn't do the table relation for the customer number, sure, but it did infer a lot of things about, oh, okay, so for an office, you'd want an office number, you'd want a name, you'd potentially want all the standard address fields, the contact fields, I mean, just the absolute massive amount of info that it inferred by just putting the table name, those two words, changed a whole huge amount of stuff. Now, one of the other things, if you haven't had a chance to try out Copilot yet, is that it proposes alternative options. In this case, it inferred potentially two solutions that I might like. They're not very different in this case, looking at the two of them. The main difference between these is, did I want to use office number or did I want to use an office code? And number is more traditionally pulled from like number series in Business Central. So therefore it would be a code 20, whereas codes in Business Central are typically more often code 10. Okay, that's kind of cool. I think I like the code 10 approach on this, since we're already uh, going to build a primary key that is compound off of the customer number office code. I think that that's perfectly acceptable. The next thing up for bid is, okay, it's proposing a bunch of stuff. What do you do now when it's proposed something to you? And you'll see that it's providing the context clues right on screen here, that if I just hit tab, it'll put all this stuff in here. If it begins to suggest something that is close to correct, but it's not quite right, you also see that you can accept part of the suggestion. You can do control right arrow to slowly work your way word by word until you get to the part where maybe it's not correct. So, okay, I like the code 10 approach. So I'm going to hit tab on this and we'll see where it goes. Now, this one was creating a pretty big, monstrous list of things. So it did get down about 80 lines and went, okay, I'm probably hitting some sort of logical limit to the Copilot, how much it can suggest. So it got down to search 100. Presumably, there's a character limit. I haven't looked it up. But it did see like, oh, you probably wanted to, complete that search name. So tab. So we've got a bunch of stuff on there, and then it just keeps going. It goes, okay, well, there's some logic to, you might want to have some different posting groups to a table. You might want to have a bunch of different things. I also accepted a whole big giant chunk of stuff, some of which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't feel the need to, on my office record, have fax or telex. Sorry. And I don't know that I need VAT registration. So sometimes it will over suggest things. Always, as one of the other rules of Copilot programming, always check what it did. It is, even if you're working locally on a project, I strongly recommend having at least a Git repository initialized in the space that you're working in, so that you can, as you're working through things, if you've missed something, you can potentially compare, did it get what it was supposed to for information. Okay, so there we go. And of course, because I've got my code cops turned on, I'm getting an error because I'm missing permissions on that. Perfectly fine. We're going to fix that as part of marching through things. So no big deal there. And so now we've got the beginning part of a useful table. We've got fields. We hit that text limit. So at the bottom here, it didn't suggest the next thing that would be perfectly logical for it to suggest, which would be keys. And it detected that I'm now wrapping up the field section, and it says, you know what? It looks an awful lot like this should be a customer number office code primary key. Yep, it should be. So thanks for that. And then if we doot on down to the next step, what do we think it'll find next? Okay. I'm kind of liking the idea that it's going, you know what, you probably want to have some field groups in here. If you haven't done field groups, you probably should. What I would have wanted to see GitHub Copilot do right here is to suggest the dropdown or the brick group in this particular case, rather than just generic field group one. So I will go ahead and just control right arrow and grab that one. Not too shabby. I like the idea. It's got the right notion, but what I really want is I want a field group called dropdown. And so now, yes, string is the, oh no, it's just complaining because it didn't have any fields. Okay, misunderstood. So Copilot very quickly takes its code suggestions that it's given you and gets them out of the way as soon as you start typing. Which I think is nice. If you then come in here and you hit space to indicate I'd like to move forward with the code, then boop, the code comes back. So we can see here that now it's going, okay, well, a drop down that probably would make an awful lot of sense for the data above is the customer number, office code, the office name, and why not the search name? That's actually a pretty good list. I like that. So tab away. And there we go. So now in relatively short order, we've just knocked out 100 lines of code. We've got a bunch of different fields that are useful fields to the sort of things that we would want. Because I don't know about you guys, but I have absolutely typed address and postcode and city and all those sort of things on too many tables. So I think this is pretty good. I'm reasonably happy with this starting point. Now, for tidy up's sake, I would also want to see a table relation on here to the customer number. So if I do table relation, it correctly infers, oh, you probably want that to be related to the customer. Yes, please. And you'll notice that there are no table relations or validation logics in any of the other fields where we might expect to see that on things like postcode and country code and all that sort of thing. So this is an example of it suggested a bunch of really good stuff. However, it didn't suggest any of the logical validations or connections or relationships to things. So you do have to check the work. It isn't a complete and total replacement. You do have to have some knowledge about what you're doing. Is there value to there being a country region code and a country region name? Probably not. I don't think that would be appropriate. And then we do the same on the table relation here on language. Sure. Okay. It would make all the sense in the world if we are going to use search name to have validation on the office name. It didn't infer that. Okay. Arguably, do we really need a search name on the office name? Probably not. But okay, so I want to do a on validate trigger on office name and see if it can guess what I'm going for. Okay. It's giving me a little weird of a potential thing. It's going, okay, well, for validation in the context of an office name, what might you want to validate? I don't know, make sure that it's not blank. Okay. That can be achieved with the not blank property. I also would say that throwing just a generic error with a flat string in it is a sign that Copilot is learning off of older code that doesn't adhere to tokenized standards and that sort of thing. So I don't think that's precisely correct. It's also doing implicit withs, not doing record. So there are places where if you aren't accustomed to reading AL and understanding the best practices, Copilot will lead you to it works, but it doesn't meet standards. So, thing to be aware of. And in my case here, I'm just wanting to validate the search name with the office name. Now, curiously, on this one, it's suggesting a pretty peculiar way of doing that. It's suggesting the search name be a string substance number, a combination of the office name and code, which is a pretty weird way to do that. But we can see here that option 2 does the logical sort of thing. Okay, there we go. So not bad. It's helped us along in some ways. I don't think it necessarily saved me overall time, but it took away some of the humdrum work. So, okay, that's not bad. We're also going to need, as we kind of outlined, we're going to need some different potential services that we'll then be able to assign to in a given office. And then we're going to need a per office schedule and service list, that sort of thing. So let's build a few more table pieces and then see how it does with pages. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm just going to call this setup because it's set up for our module. And I'll create our new folder. Again, just relying on the file naming. As long as it's .al, it'll do whatever it's supposed to. So if we come on in here, and again, it's so weird to not use snippets and all the things like that. Now, here's a charming example of Copilot does occasionally go completely nuts, off into La La Land. I have absolutely no idea what possible source code it read, what logic is in place that made it think what I need right now is for Copilot to count for me like an enthusiastic 3-year-old who learned their numbers. No idea. It doesn't even have alternative suggestions. It's just, I have no idea. And you want to name it something? It's probably the table. Really? So it is enthusiastically wrong as much as it is enthusiastically right. So we're going to call this a cleaning service. Seems perfectly fine. And this one, let's see if it can infer anything about what I want to do at this point from that. Okay, well, this is less optimal. It's interesting what it's suggesting, but it's not really super helpful. It is correctly inferring that I probably want a code type thing, and that I probably want it to be some sort of cleaning service. But there's some absolute bonkers stuff in here. So this is an example of enthusiastically wrong. This time around, it suggested a number key that is primary key of code 20 that somehow or another has a table relationship to itself. Okay. Interesting. Again, enthusiastic 3-year-old just plugging the extension power strip into itself, but okay, sure. And then, of course, we want a cleaning service code that is this table related to itself. And somehow the text is supposed to be related to itself as well. And it has learned from what I just did in the previous example that I really like table relationships because I went through and I added a whole bunch of table relationships. So, and this guy, he wants a table relationship on everything. So every description, every code, everything has a table relation right now. Completely nutters, nonsensible. And unfortunately, then you also even get some things where it's clearly learned from some bad habits in some different areas. I don't know what source code it might have just learned from here, but check out this third suggestion where now it's doing all of the fields as like one-liners. If you know what this chunk of field text is what happens when you take CAL from pre-Business Central 14, 14 and older, and you export it as text. This is how the field list exports. Bonkers. And hello to Pakistan. So I'm just going to go, you know what? Clearly at this point, it has no idea what I want to do with this table. It's less equipped knowing Business Central. There's not a lot of built-in functionality that would map for a cleaning service idea. So it's not going to suggest anything useful to me. Here now it's beginning to suggest that maybe there's a cleaning service header somewhere that there's not one of those. It's suggesting options that I write enums. I don't write options anymore. So it's now lost and it's not going to be able to suggest anything useful to me. I want a cleaning service code whatever that happens to be. And there we go. So now when I start to type code, it's at least going, all right, well, maybe this guy wants just a code 20 and that I should just call this code. It's closer. It's still going, hey, I've noticed he really loves table relations. Once again, completely nonsensical plugging into itself. So I will take its code 20 suggestion and we'll move on from there. It's suggesting a caption that I'm pretty comfortable with. And that's about all it's able to do for me. Now, my hope here is that at this point it's going to notice, there we go, that this is adhering to a bit more of a pattern of a standard sort of setup or a subsidiary table where I've given it some sort of code field, and so therefore I probably want a description next. It is learned off of the mixed bag of description. Sometimes in the system is text 50, sometimes it's text 100. It's not sure which I might want, but I do in fact want the text 100, so that's good. And actually I want the cleaning service to be code 10. So that gets us our basic table there. And now it goes, okay, well, now I've got some idea what kind of table you're making, so I will give you the fields that you want. And again, I will want some field groups on this because you always should make field groups, particularly for dropdowns. I hope everyone watching is aware that if someone tries to build an extension off of your table and they want to add stuff to your dropdown list, that if you haven't made a field group called dropdown, they can't add it. So you always make field group dropdowns, right? So it infers correctly that I want a code and description and that I have a caption on it. Sure, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so that's not bad. I'm going to save that real quick so it gets renamed and labeled as the correct sort of thing. And we're going to need some captions are nice. Good suggestion on property here. I had not previously. Back on here, I gave it a data classification, didn't give it a caption. I have a prefix on it, and it's suggesting the caption be the same as the table name. Let's see. I've just taught it that I like the caption to be the name of the object without this CC prefix. I'm curious to see if it has picked up that pattern. Okay. So unfortunately, it went, nope, I have not learned from my mistakes yet. Okay. Now let's give it a data classification of customer content. That's perfectly fine. Sounds good. Okay. Enough info that gets us started. And then we're going to zoom along on a couple of things. I probably won't review each of the suggestions in detail for this one. On a for office level, we want to have a table 7602, and we're going to give this one the prefix right from the get-go, which tries to autocomplete of, Creative Commons. I'm well familiar with Creative Commons. No. So this one is going to be office services. So we can just choose for each office location which services that it might want. And I'll be curious to see. Yeah, it has absolutely no idea what to do with me at this moment in time. Let's save that. So it's all named. There we go. Now, fields, it's got no idea what I'm trying to achieve with this table. So I'm curious because this is an experiment. I've done this before and it's helped out Copilot to understand a little bit more. These are the services. Let's give it this context of these are the cleaning services for each customer office. I'm curious if this will give it a little bit more context about what I'm trying to achieve. Now, if we start creating our fields section, it made it go, okay. Maybe you want service ID, names, description, price, type. That's closer. And it's Second suggestion is not bad. Again, it's cal formatted, not al formatted. So unfortunately, you will see that Copilot does pull from cal here and there. Um, not optimal. Um, so yeah. Interestingly, you can also open up the. I haven't mentioned this yet, so this is relatively new, where you can ask it to potentially size a small variety of solutions and browse between them. So that's kind of an interesting and cool option. I think this is part of the new nightly and where they're trying to go with the GitHub Copilot X, where it potentially is going to generate a variety of different options based on some of the info. And you can see here we get some really fascinating, really rich results in Copilot that maybe they're not great, but like check out this customer number. In this particular case, they're doing validations to go check if the customer exists and if the customer type isn't a company. Some really interesting attempts by Copilot to infer what I'm trying to achieve here. And we can see here it's still doing more of this solution here is a CAL solution. It's doing the field one lines and all that sort of thing in a CAL style. Yeah, and a lot of them down here are now doing that. You can see this is where we're getting some more of the wonderful like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 messy stuff. So none of these are accomplishing what I would want of it. What I would want of this, I would want to have this one be field one, and this would be the customer. I almost inferred what I might want. I don't approve of the field name that it's trying to generate here. So let's see if we can encourage it along. Closer to what I would like here, that it's now at least creating a code 20 that's relation to customer number. That's cool. And now it's starting to go, oh, okay, wait. Maybe this has something to do with that office thing that you just made. Field number 2, now it's suggesting we might want the second field to be the office number with a relationship for us that is to the customer office table that I made, where the customer number is equal to the customer number. That's really actually pretty good. It did learn, and it learned it off of my source code as I wrote it, because after all, I named it customer office, and then Waldo's extension changed the name to have the prefix that I wanted. Copilot doesn't know about the rename, so it gave the old name. So that shows that it learned off of what I was writing as I was writing it, which is kind of cool. And now it goes, okay, well, I just watched you make a cleaning service table. And so probably what you want next, since I've said cleaning services above in the comment, which gave it some context, now it says, okay, I got this. You might want to have the cleaning service code, which you'll note I changed this code to 20, from 20 to 10. Copilot had suggested code 20. I took the suggestion of 20 and then came back and changed it later. It did not learn that I changed this. So a little bit interesting. But the relationship is correct there. So now we at least can say, all right, we have a master table somewhere that connects up for this customer office, which is a compound primary key. We want to have the following cleaning service codes. That's all correct. And that's pretty much all this table needs to be. So now we can go ahead and say, all right, well, we do need some keys. This is the wrong key. We want it to be a compound key here where we're connecting up many to many with a compound key to a simple key. Yeah. And this second suggestion is correctly inferred that yes, we want the cleaning service code as part of that primary key. So for a given office, we can have all the following services. Let's see here. And then last but not least, we'll create a new little AL file. And I'm going to be a little bit lazier and say yes. I'm not, yes, I'll go ahead and start using Object ID ninjas. Thank you, Vico. That's it. No more Object ID conflicts. I love some of the gentle sass and positive vibes in there on that one. So for this one, we now need something called an office schedule. And this office schedule is going to be a list of dates of service for a given customer office. And what that means is if we, for example, are under a 1-year contract for a given office, to clean it every 2 weeks or something like that, when the contract is signed, we will potentially want a process that generates the schedule. And now we've got all the upcoming dates that are covered by the contract. And that way, our Power Platform team can go hear all the dates. So that way a customer can view the schedule, check it over, potentially ask for reschedules or cancels, et cetera, et cetera. So now we've given the compiler or Copilot of what we're going to be with this table. So now let's see if any chance at all of giving us some fields that make sense. We'll find out. Maybe it's thinking about it. So now it goes, okay, you possibly want a customer office number, and you probably want a date of service, and maybe you want a start time, end time. Maybe you want an option. Maybe you want all these different crazy things I don't need. This to me is an example of when Copilot goes yammering down the corridor a little bit here. On field 7 here, it suggested type code. Field 8, type code description, and then it just repeats forever here. It's code 2 description, code 3 description. If it didn't get cut off by a character limit here, this, I have seen it. When it does this, it gave me the suggestion of 39 variables for the same record. I don't know why. Not sure what the wander down that process is. So pretty close. It's at least getting the idea that I need another compound key sort of situation where it's the customer office number and the customer number. I would like it to be in the correct order here, just like our customer and office number on this table. So I'm just going to save myself some time and effort, copy and paste. Because we have Copilot doesn't mean that it's the answer to every efficiency game. Like I would still be using snippets and wizards to do a lot of the beginning description stuff. So now we've got the customer number, office number, and let's go ahead and we'll say, yep, we want a date of service. Sounds good. And then it can potentially say, okay, well, maybe you do different services on different dates. I'm going to keep it simple for today's demo because we're already at 45 minutes. And I'm just going to have straight a list of dates, and the services that are booked are the services that are performed on that given date. The only thing I will do is I will add a field that allows us to mark if the service is canceled or not. So let's add a canceled. And crazy enough, tooltips notwithstanding, when I started to type can, it knew maybe you want canceled. Yes, I do want canceled. Thank you. Cool. All right. Well, and once again, we need to give it some properties here. And again, it's still assuming table name equals caption name. Okay, we can work with that, but I still would like it to be non-decorated. Thank you. And data classification, customer content. Sure. I'm not going to worry about, this isn't a GDPR class. We also still need to define what's the key situation here. Architecture class is a different thing altogether. I would actually do a line number and have it be auto line and not have the date as part of the primary key. So that way things can be moved around. When a date is changed, it's not a rename. Sake of efficiency for today's stream, to keep it down to a reasonable speed, I am going to take the non-optimal, just date of service is fine for what we're doing today. If someone is going to reschedule, then they will cancel day 1 and create a new day 2 rather than worry about renames, all that fun stuff. So there we go. That gives us some basic stuff. And let's see, it has learned that I do like field groups, yes, but that field group has no logic to me whatsoever. So yep, I'm going to get rid of that one. And I want my field group drop down. I'm hoping that it has learned a little bit. Oop, there we go. Better. It's suggesting I include cancel in that. That's true. If again, design principles, if you're potentially using the solution that we're building here, if you were going to be using this on mobile or want to be good and responsible about all the different things that might be seen on mobile, you would also want to make sure that you're making field groups for brick view as well. But not going to dive into that. Again, not a best practice class. Okay, so we've got our basic table infrastructure on everything here. The only thing that we did not do, I'm going to keep it simple for the sake of this workshop, and we are going to set an LCY value on a given service. So in here, we want to have, because we're going to do invoicing shortly, let's do a unit price LCY. And I was hoping that it would be savvy enough that with an LCY field, it might also think a little bit about the auto format types and expressions when dealing with an LCY, because that's also good DISM behavior, but it is not doing any of the autocompletes on that. Since that's outside of scope, we'll not worry about that today. Whenever I'm dealing with price fields, I do also generally do blank numbers, specifically blank 0. I think it visually works better for pricing tables. Makes it a little more obvious. There we go. Okay, so that gets us the basics of that. Now let's see how it does in creating some UI for us on this one. We're going to need to have a customer offices list. We're going to need to have a customer offices card. On the card, I would want to have two sub page type things where we choose the different services and see the schedule and all that fun stuff. So we're going to create all those different parts now. And yeah, so let's do that. If I were building a solution for realsies, my very first table and very first page are always a setup for the given app. And so I'm not doing that here. So I'm keeping the principle of this simple and narrow enough that we're not doing a setup table for the overall module right this very second, but that's fine. So now we're doing a list page, and we'll grab our ID Ninja, and let's see, does it have any idea what kind of page I'm building right this second? It does not. That's exciting. Copilot going completely nutters here, suggesting that I would like a page around the 2010s. And potentially edit different years. I think this is learned off of Wikipedia here or something silly such. No idea. Customer office list. And it's just complaining about the name. Okay. Now we have utter nonsense coming in from Copilot. I don't know what language it's trying to work with here, but this looks like a very lovely JSON that recurs. It looks like it's infinitely looping through JSON building. And then it tries really hard. Again, this looks like it's working off of some older styles of things because caption ML is not really supposed to use that anymore. And then this gives us a fascinating tour through the possible properties of a page. And all of the many different things that might come in with that. So it clearly has no idea off of customer office list what kind of page I'm trying to produce at this moment in time, which is a little unfortunate. So I'm curious if I give a little bit of comment hinting to it if it'll infer a little bit more, which is a way that you can get Copilot to help you a little bit better. Is if you're describing what you're trying to achieve in the comments, not only are you leaving comments for your future self and future other developers and that sort of thing, which can be a good practice, you are also giving Copilot some sense of what is going on. So, for example, if I used the documentation comment up here on the page, this is the list page for the CC customer office table. I'm curious to see if that gives it any sort of better sense of what I'm trying to achieve. It might not. It's going to have to think about it for a moment, but we'll see. Okay, that helped. First of all, it's giving us a caption. It's giving us a page type of list. It's giving us a usage category of list. It is pulling the right source table. It is understanding that a list page should have a repeater. It's pulling from base app, naming this thing control 1. This is an angry squint at Microsoft for still having all of the control number names of things. Copilot is learning from you, and so are junior devs. As I tell parents that I talk to, model the behavior you want to see in the world. All right. But I understand it's breaking change. Anyways, so this gives us a list of all of the different fields that it infers we might want to have in a list. However, you'll notice that as we're kind of cruising through this, this is way more fields than we have on the table in question. It has no context understanding to connect that we're making a list off of a set of fields on the table. It just goes, these kind of are customary fields, and down here, contact email to, now it goes into the loop forever, and it's likely hitting the character limit there. So this would be something that you could control right arrow through all these different things. This is the closest property chunk to what I want to have. So let's cruise through this. And I don't approve that it just changed its suggestion partway through that. Cool. So we'll call this customer caption, blah, blah, blah. It's page type of list. That's true. Usage category list, source table. So at least now it's giving some of the correct inference. Application area is all. All right. So now you want to getting all the fun stuff here. We want to give our, yeah, there we go. I was waiting for it to see if it would create the layout. Not bad, but again, it looks like it's realistically that it's just pulling off of some basic customer table stuff again, that it's not really understanding what I'm trying to achieve here, and not connecting it to the table that we built. So, okay, well, that's fine. So let's do an area content. Between IntelliSense dropdowns, tooltips, and GitHub autocomplete, the IDE is getting pretty busy though. So just bear in mind that there are some challenges with all these different things coming into play. Some of these are bugs that I hope are worked out. Some of them are just unintended consequences of things. Like you'll notice here and there, I keep having to scroll up. If I scroll down right now, I'm looking at all of the GitHub Copilot suggestions, but that's all crammed in between line 16 and 17. When I hit enter, it jumped the screen in completely the wrong place because it's trying to deal with all the suggestions. So I do want a repeater group. And there is an example. I hit enter to go to the next line, and now the scroll bar context is completely lost, and I just dropped to the bottom of the page. So there are still some rough edges here and there, and they do add up to some frustration sometimes. Now, in this particular case, it's doing its best to guess at the sort of things I would want. Again, it's learning off of base app that still has a lot of implicit widths in base apps. So here we don't have any of these things. All of these suggestions are missing rec dot. Not great. So rather than fight through trying to complete a simple task of adding a bunch of fields here, I am going to fall back onto some extension logic that does have semantic parsing of knowing what fields we're adding. So thank you, AZLL DevTools. I am just going to add multiple fields, and I'm going to sort that based on ID. And what I want to expose on the list here is the office code, name, let's also do contact and phone number. That seems plenty for a list. And we get all of these charming specifies the value of. We'll see how that goes over time there. Basic list page. This list, I want it to be else because we're going to make a card page for it. Let's close all the others up so that our UI is a little gentler on everyone here. And we'll go ahead and create a new page that is going to be, and in this particular case, we are going to be CC customer office. Let's see if it is able to infer anything about what I want to do with this. And bottom right, you'll see Copilot thinks for a moment or two, and whoo, does this have nothing to do with AL, really? Again, we're looking at a giant funky JSON that iterates weirdly. Template title. No idea what it's thinking here. It clearly has no idea what we're working with. So save that for tidy. Yes, it needs to have some properties and everything. If we give it some context clues, maybe it'll have a little bit better. This is the card page for editing the customer office, along with subpages for selecting services and dates. Add cleaning services and dates. So, okay, now we've theoretically given Copilot a little bit more to hang its hat off of, so to speak. Let's see if we can give it some sense of, we're making progress. It has learned. It took a few objects, but it has learned from me that I actually don't want to have that CC at the beginning of the caption. So we've developed some learning here. And now the rest of the time I'm building this extension, there's a much more significant probability that it's going to understand what I want. So that's cool. And it is correctly inferring that it should be coming from it should be the card. It should be coming from customer office. In this case, it has incorrectly learned to remove the CC. Because the object names actually do have that. We don't want any sort of usage category on this one. That's fine. And now, theoretically, let's see how it does with the idea of adding some content to it. Does it learn anything from the list that we just made? I don't know. Let's find out. Give it a half a second. Again, it is thinking, analyzing, all that fun stuff. Okay, well, no, didn't really learn. It's customer office, customer number, customer name, customer office name, customer. This is the guessing game of a language learning model, not understanding actually what sort of fields we have. And again, same sort of thing. If we page through all these, it's just guessing games, and it's guessing wrongly. Again, a bunch of missing implicit withs doesn't make it any better. So I'm going to speed things along a little bit here and say, okay, we're going to take the area content. I agree with that part. Control right arrow does not work across lines. So as I went through and was control right arrow on arrow content, area content, I couldn't then accept its suggestion about the bracket group. So here, if I took its suggestion group office, it control right arrow doesn't go to the next line and then do the open bracket. So there are some limits. So I'm going to do a group, and I'm just going to call this one general. Thank you. Um, Perfectly serviceable. Um, and now, again, I find that in this moment, it's easier for me to rely on an extension that has semantic understanding of the table that we're pulling from rather than a language learning model that has to infer the context. So here it's guessing at a bunch of stuff. And it's way off. I mean, we don't have anything called cleaning service currency decimal places. That doesn't exist. This is just putting business central words in a blender and going, I guess you'd like a shot of this. No. So we'll add fields ourselves. In this case, we'll do the office code and name. We could potentially show the number on the card, but I want to make it non-editable. So we'll just add some of the normal nonsense here, all that sort of stuff. We could add lots more. I don't really feel the need to do that as part of this. We're not trying to build a minimum viable product on this. But that gives us at least the card. So now on the list, we can come back here and say card page ID. And now it's like, hey, I just recently saw you do something about a card. So that's probably the one you mean. Yes, that's true. So that's good. All right. So that gets us a little bit of progress towards being able to do some different things. We do need to make the list parts for the services that that office will want. So we're going to call this CC Office Services sub page. Might be too long. We'll see. Things length word. Cool. Okay. So if we start typing along on this one, let's see if it has any hope on this one. And now it's gone, well, you recently corrected me when I dropped the CC, so you probably want the CC. Office services. Oh, and the page type is actually going to be a list part, but it tried. It did suggest a card part since I said subpage. No, not bad. Okay. And now, no, not bad. It correctly inferred I wanted the CC Office services. And it's trying to apply a source table view here, but no, we're going to apply that on the card where we consume this subpart. So not what we need it to do. And yes, I'm application alling everything. There are much better ways to do that sort of thing. Fine. Layout on this. Let's see. I don't know if it'll have any better shot at this. No. I would not want that. It's interesting. It's trying a little bit harder. It's going, maybe you're talking about service types and descriptions, and there's probably a price. So it's trying. But again, it feels a lot more like just business central words in a blender again. So unfortunately, no, that's not going to really help me. So we're not at the point where some people have asked, the question of, as a developer, do you feel like Copilot is going to eventually learn and get the hang of a bunch of this stuff and replace you as a dev? And the answer to that continues to be no. Do I think it'll be faster, more efficient? Do I, absolutely. Do I think that the calculator replacing the slide rule decreased the need for engineers? No. Made them better, made them able to do more. Maybe you need less of them, but the work level has increased and gone up. So the demand didn't go down. So faster is better. So that's my take. So we're going to create a repeater, and it's interesting. It's suggesting group. I'm going to be a wise guy and go ahead and name this control1 just to be asking myself later about it. So on this one, we'll, again, rely more on the context-aware tools that really know what fields are going on. And on the subpart, I don't need to have... Ooh. Hey, did I mistake something? Nope, all good. Interesting. When I went to add the unit price, I added the unit price on the per office level. I did not add that price to the cleaning service table. So I was looking at it going, why is the unit price here? Which is its own interesting use case. One could make the argument of this would allow you to do special deals and things on some of the different price models. So I like that, and I'm going to just continue to keep that. That's fine. That does mean then that we will go ahead and include the code and unit price. Okay. So I'm curious to see too, one of the areas that I have gotten I've been asked, is there some places where Copilot helps in better ways? Let's try out one of them. I'm curious to see if we can get Copilot to give us a better tooltip. In this case, no, it's just giving us the specifies the value of. There's so much training data that is specifies the value of that it's heavily weighted in Copilot to do these sort of things. So, which cleaning service is this? Yeah, that's a better tooltip to me. So, okay. And now it's going, oh, you would like tooltips that are real and have meaning? Okay, meaning mode activated. Sure, the price of the service in the local currency. And in this case, it's for this specific office. So I have found that as you start to teach Copilot, that you don't just want tooltips and field captions to be, specifies the blah blah blah. That it massively improves your tendency to write tooltips that are meaningful to a user, and that's a good thing. I think I'm still deeply in the camp of tooltips don't belong in the code, because the consultants, product managers, and documentation teams, who are the people who are communicating the value, the properties, the operations, are not the ones sitting here looking at Visual Studio Code. These should not live here. Changing that's going to be a very big process. But until then, Copilot actually does a good job of changing up, at least it's not specifies the blah, blah, blah. So something. I will take that something. It's small. All right. Yes, for those of you who have never watched me stream before, there are the occasional small soapbox moments. Sorry. All right, let's create a page that is just going to be our schedule. And this is very rudimentary, bare minimum, again, minimum viable product. I saw, there's that great meme going around of like the purpose of a first draft is to exist. So no matter how terrible the first draft is, if it exists, it's achieved the objective. That's this version that we're making right now. So this is going to be the office schedule subpage. Let's see if we get anywhere on Copilot helping us what we're going to try to do here. Still trying to make a JSON. Okay. All right. Let's be efficient with ourselves here, and we're going to, well, no. Copying and pasting won't make us more efficient on that one. So let's make this office schedule. And again, it's gone back to the, oh, you like to delete the CC on the captions, but it did suggest double quotes to me. I foolishly let it. Again, it's thinking that I want a card part. I don't. I want a list part. And then we want the this to come from the office schedule and all. Okay. What do you think, buddy? Can you do a better layout this time? No. Not at all. I could accept this and then I get like a bunch of lines. I could then delete the fields, but it goes so off into La La Land on what it's suggesting here that I don't find that there's value to that process. So let's just do area. And this is why I still find a whole bunch of value in making use of snippets. Copilot does not replace the need for snippets. It just doesn't. Um, they're helpful in collaboration, but it is not a straight replacement. Okey-dokey. So we're going to create this one. It is going to be a repeater. Lol. And again, I am going to rely on context aware because Copilot is not doing a very good job with that. I would like just date of service and canceled. And once again, it's going to give us our garbage tooltips. Not garbage, but they aren't meaningful. Let's put it that way. So once again, it's going, all right, well, you want that specifies things on which the service will be performed. There we go. So that's a little better. And I don't. Sure. I mean, I feel like that's over explaining as a tooltip. If the service is canceled, this field will be checked. Okay. It's over explaining a little, but if someone's brand new to Business Central, that's not terrible as a suggestion. So, okay. All right. We'll take it. We'll take it. And then finally, last but not least, back here on our customer office card, we've got the general group, and I'm going to add these list parts as parts. And it's trying to infer what I'm talking about. That probably here now, I've been talking about cleaning services, so maybe you want a cleaning services part, and maybe it's called CC Customer Office Cleaning Services. It's not a bad guess, but it's just a guess. It's also not right. So, right side here is that we do have the prefix, so it's really easy to filter on this. And now it's going through and it's going, all right, well, you probably need a application area and you need a subpage link, which is true. I need those things. Application area is a different discussion because depending on what BC version you're on, you may not need those at the top level versus the bottom level. Yeah, there's a whole thing there. The subpage link on this one, we have a compound key. So office code is not sufficient for this one, but it doesn't know about the customer number from the context of this object. We're not exposing that customer number on this object, so it doesn't know that we should be taking that into account. So if we do a subpage link and we rely more on our IntelliSense, then at least it starts to go, okay, all right, well, customer number. And now we can say, comma, and it goes, oh, right, office code. You've told me about that a bunch lately. And I remember now. Sure you do. Oh, interesting. Services subpage. Did I blow right through putting this on the wrong table? Pardon for a second. Again, is yeah. Did I create the table wrong? Blowing through things too quick. Well, for starters, those of you who are following super closely in the stream, you probably noticed that, in fact, my on-office services is technically wrong. I believe the office number is actually off code. Yep, code 10. So we have a couple of places where that got set wrong, and it would potentially cause us some real challenges and real trouble later on. So office number getting populated all over the place is not correct. And this is where you do lose time with Copilot, is that it will sometimes infer things that look close enough to right that you will blow right past it being wrong. It is very easy to make these sort of mistakes because those are both common patterns. Those are both valid patterns, but it's not the pattern that I chose. I chose to do office code, not number. So be aware that Copilot saves you time, but sometimes it just transfers the time you spend to checking your work and potentially driving yourself nuts when you realize that something isn't working quite correctly. So now office code equals office code. Now that works because I have consistently named my fields. That's a good idea. Other things that little things that it did wrong in the same sort of vein. If we look at customer office, again, this is a compound primary key. So that means that this table relation didn't get created correctly because we need to specify that we want the office code. Not just the first field of the table. So there are places where primary keys are not inferred correctly. So if you do work with table relations with this, you gotta unfortunately check the work on this really hard because we just went right past it. I didn't look at it while we were going through it, and yep, so that would have been incorrect. Okay. It would have been real obvious as soon as we hit publish and we tried to do the drill down and it went, no, there's nothing to work with there. Okay, well, there we go. That's all that stuff. Let's save everything. Just that way we're of the save away. Quite finished setting up the card here. We have the cleaning service. We'd still need the cleaning schedule. And you'll notice that it started to go, you want cleaning dates, and you maybe mean the cleaning dates, blah, blah, blah. Here, now, at least it's going, okay, I think I've got it now, man. This is looking for the office schedule subpage, and you probably want to link it based on the customer number and office code. So in this case, yeah, man, good job. That's actually quite correct and saves me a fair bit of typing. So cool. Subpage links and table relations aren't super fun things to write, so I'd love for you to take care of that for me. Cool. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. We didn't create a little basic page for the cleaning service setup. In the interest of time, I'm gonna just real speedy spin up a page wizard off of that. Grab it off of ID Ninja, please, and it's gonna be CC cleaning learning cleaning service. And this one's just going to be a basic list that is editable. We don't need to do the card list card pattern. So it's just going to be plural. If you didn't know that and you're watching the stream, that's the naming pattern of if it's a list that has no card, then it's just plural. If it is a list that has a card, then it typically is cleaning service list. So that's the theoretically way it's supposed to work. This is going to be an administration thing, and then we're going to just add these 3 fields, and there we go. So there are still some places where, frankly, extensions will save you a lot more time than Copilot saves you time. This page is a beautiful example of that. I mean, that was a dozen clicks of and then bam, I've got a page. So there are still places where extensions are your friend over Copilot. Okay, well, let's see. We've gotten through a couple of our major things, and we need to let's create a new folder for APIs real quick. And this is just going to be a basic page API. I'm not going to build up a whole query thing. And the reason for that is I potentially want to have date cancellations and reschedules come through. Again, let's see if Copilot can do an API page. I haven't tried that on screen. I haven't tried that at all. So find out how it does. All right, so we're going to create a CC office schedule. Okay. This is a fascinating JSON object again. Still really not Copilot not really catching on to that if it's an .al file that I'm going to have AL code in it, not a JSON object. So that's interesting. Hopefully that gets fixed. This is the API for, okay, there we go. The description is actually helpful. This is true. This is the API for the office schedule. It's used to create and manage the office schedule. Yeah, that's true. So let's see if it does a little bit better with the context. I don't know if it will or not. Okay, that's a little better. It's at least acknowledging that it should be a page type API and that we probably want some content to this, but it is nonsensibly baking the rest of things. I mean, I'm not going to put an action or global variable on an API page like this. So that's bonkers. This is a little bit closer and also reveals something interesting. This version of the suggestion on the API, at least it goes, okay, it's a page type API. You need the API properties. I can see where it's potentially learned from Microsoft. So let's see if we can help it out a little bit here. Part of the challenge is that it's looking at Office as a word, but not understanding that I'm talking about my customer office schedule. And this has to do with my custom solution. So let's give it a little bit of a break and call this Cust Office Schedule API and see if that gives it any context about what I'm trying to accomplish here. I don't think it will, to be perfectly frank. That's going to generate some options. Again, at least it understands that now I want a page and that it's type of API, but it absolutely still has no idea what I should be putting on here. So let's give it some hint of what should be going on. That it's page type API, its source table on this, it should be the CC. I understand that those are all property values that are required. Yes, the plan is to add those. I'm curious why our source table is not auto-completing though. Interesting. IntelliSense does not want to do an autocomplete while I've got errors. And that's really common if you haven't run into that before, that the IntelliSense does not like there to be build errors and will often not cooperate in how that all works. So it is true that I named this CC Office Schedule. So trying to give it a prompt to say, well, I'm talking about the customer office schedule really didn't help at all. All right, well, let's see if with this info, a few more properties that I would expect. Interesting. Copilot just quitting for the day, I guess. So let's drop that out and we'll save that. It's got nothing. That's exciting. Try the completion panel here. This completion panel may be part of the nightly, where it potentially does a variety of different things. Yeah, comment in from LinkedIn of like I can pull down the palette and reload the window. That's true. In this particular case, I was just trying to kick over GitHub into thinking about the file fresh and new. Visual Studio Code itself is working, behaving correctly. But we can see all of these synthesized answers. None of them are giving me the API property pages that I would expect to get. It's focused entirely on all of the different layouts, all of the different fields that I would potentially want to add to an API page, not giving me what I need. So if we do API publisher, I think so. We'll put in spare brain. I'm going to do that as all one word because it's in the URLs. Okay, So now it's gonna go, okay, well, maybe, just maybe, you might want some of these other API groups. That's true. In this case, clean code for our app, API version. No. Okay. Yep, string literal. That's what I thought. Okay. Oh, I wanted to be. So yeah, Copilot is not helping with the API at all because now it's starting to suggest not bonkers things like publisher URLs. Uh, I do see the comment section, but it does tend to tick over pretty slowly. A comment from LinkedIn of like, "Hey, if you could see the comments, that would be good." Yeah. So. Um, Alrighty. Well, this gives us at least some of the properties. I would say where I'm seeing this behavior is that Copilot is not going to get you where you need to go faster at API development than extensions on the market space. I will definitely say that. So if I were to try to have done the same task using the AZAL wizard for building an API page, I would have already long since been done, because there are a lot of properties you need to add, and that exposes those in a smarter way. So I'm just gonna, for the laughs, because it will understand that I want to add columns to the layout. I'm just going to skip ahead to the layout for a second because I'm curious too if it's going to understand naming, because this APIs in Business Central are an access point through the OData engine. So the names of things are specifically trying to be a bit more OData friendly. And my hunch is that by hooking into, uh, sorry, this is going to be, yeah, it's not, I saw the autocomplete there. It's still giving us all of the field names in the page name style. So Copilot doesn't really seem to understand the context of when that page type takes over to API. It's not going to be like other pages. That's just not how that works. It gets a little bit closer with some of its suggestions, but I would say if you're building custom APIs, don't rely on Copilot on this one. I'm just going to flat out call that a non-starter for me. I'm not going to use it as part of that. Between the extensions that we have, I can make things so much faster doing this. So if I just did a page type and I say object ID and I grab CC customer, actually, this is the office schedule API, and this is coming from CC office schedule. I'm doing part type of API. Check that out. I mean, like, again, it understands the context much better, unfortunately. So clean coder version 1. This is going to be office schedule. Sure, it's the same. Fine. And we can say, okay, for given objects, I don't need to expose any flow filters. And there we go. This is far more efficient than anything Copilot was bringing to the table. So I feel like if a new to AL programmer was relying on Copilot to help with an API building experience, I would worry for them. I don't think it's there yet. It doesn't understand the context that an API page is a whole separate kind of page from other page type objects. So I would call that one a non-starter a little bit. Okay. Again, I'm aiming for minimum viable product. We're not going to walk through like adding all the functional hooks to everything today. So if you're looking for, we're going to go into some great depth of detail and everything. Probably not going to hit it as deep as you want. All right. Last but not least, I need to potentially have some mechanism by which I can generate monthly invoices. Anytime you're dealing with monthly recurring invoices and all that sort of thing, things get really complicated really quickly because you're generating sales documents. You can ask lots of what if questions of, well, like, what if you generate them and then someone else in the office goes, I want to generate this month's invoice all over again. What if I delete an invoice and I need to regenerate it? There's a million what if questions when we start going down the edge cases around invoice generation, and none of my data structure in place right now helps with a lot of those edge cases. So we're going to do the simplest possible implementation of this as I can feasibly think of, which is I am going to come into our customer office and I am going to add simply a next invoice date that is user editable. We'll take that over. Um, as part of the good practice and all, whoa. As part of the good practice, I would do all sorts of stuff like have a recurrence date formula on a setup table somewhere, all sorts of different things. What we're going to do is a very simple and straightforward that when we invoice, it increments the next invoice date by 1 month. And I'm going to do the evil and awful thing of hard coding that into my code unit. So I apologize to anyone. Try not to faint. That would definitely normally live in some setup tables somewhere. But let's do some invoicing logic here, and we'll create a new file around that. Let's make sure we've got everything all saved. Okay, and I'm also, again, production environment, I'm deeply bothered by having like all of this work as uncommitted and still red errors. It's partway through the process, but I usually clean as I go so that I see that things clean up. So I'm having a hard time with all the red and green. A good question in from someone over on LinkedIn. Have you tried the VS Code GitHub Copilot Labs extension? I have not yet. A lot of the GitHub Copilot stuff that's coming soon. GitHub Copilot X. X is their kind of group naming around all the stuff coming soon. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty posh. So for example, one of the new things coming is GitHub Copilot Chat, which lets you potentially discuss the code in context with GitHub, and potentially ask it to explain parts of code, or discuss it in a very chat sort of thing, and it's context aware. So that's going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to that. I'm on the wait list for it. It is not generally available yet. It's waitlisted. There is additionally more stuff coming in GitHub Copilot for repositories, where if you're doing pull requests and stuff like that, it can potentially generate pull requests in more detail for you. So that's really fascinating. And there's some GitHub stuff coming for command lines. That's also interesting. All of that's all on wait lists. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's coming soon. And I think the GitHub Copilot Labs extension is one of the ones that falls into this new category of we don't quite have access to it yet. I could be wrong. Feel free to correct me in comments. It's hard to keep up. AI is moving quick, for sure. So I'm going to create an AL file. Rather than just write from complete scratch on a Copilot, I am going to go ahead and snippetize a little bit here, where I will use a code unit method without UI. Without UI. And we'll use Waldo's snippet for this of CC generate. Okay. For those of you who haven't used the snippet before, don't be terrified. It's just a really syntactically well structured way of putting before and after events around a core single responsibility principle method. So I like that a whole bunch. And this is a really straightforward way to do that. So we're going to do an internal procedure called generate invoice, and it is going to take a customer office. So we'll take ACC customer autocomplete messing me up a little bit there. It's trying to suggest it there, but I'm currently my cursor is in multiple places. So I don't want to accept the multi-complete, which I think is coming from Copilot. Okay, so that's a little bit messy because it's a big giant chunk of code all coming in at once. We got some double quotes that got spilled over. All right. Okay, cool. So this gives us a basic generate invoice method to understand, we're going to throw our before and after and all this stuff. And the actual code of what we need to do is going to be here in the do generate invoice. So whenever I'm writing code units and that sort of thing, I generally speaking will do comments first so I don't lose track of what I am trying to operationally do. So for example, I would want to, in a development setting, if we were making this for real product, I'd want to check lots of stuff. I'd want to do a lot of like before validation on the customer, validation on the office, validation on all the services involved, make sure they all have prices. So I would write before we start, validate the setup info, and then I would potentially, I like that. That sounds cool. So it understood based on my comment, and this is one of the powers of comments with Copilot. It gave it the context that I want to validate setup. So it suggested to me want a procedure called validate setup. And then now I can combine with the extensions that I have in my product. I can do create procedure validate setup, which semantically understands that we're being passed a customer office, and we potentially would do all of our validation work here. And there we go. So I'm not writing the whole thing right now. So what we need to do is we need to now generate the sales invoice header. We're actually going to sales header of document type invoice. And then we want to generate sales lines for each of the services from the office services table. So now we've got some sort of kind of rough flow that it's going to maybe understand what we want to achieve. Let's see. I don't know if it will or not. So let's say I wanted to make a generate. There we go. That's not bad. Okay. Yeah, it wants to say generate sales header. That's true. I will make a procedure called generate header. And then we have it auto suggest okay, you probably want generate sales lines for customer office. And that's true, but I also want to pass a sales header. Now the sales header object doesn't exist. We've been creating that as part of this procedure. So now again, the Copilot doesn't save us a whole lot of steps here, but some of our extensions do, where we could say, okay, you know what, we're going to add a local variable. Thank you, AL Navigator. Some of the extension authors are watching this stream or watching it later, and I just say I appreciate you so much. Naming your variables in a smart way, it then infers what you probably want. Cool stuff. If we potentially needed the sales lines, we could also pass the sales lines in as a var. I am going to show off one of the things I like about Feldhoff's tool here. If we create the procedure, and this is coming from AL Code Actions, I generate the sales header, it passes in the customer office, and then I realize, oh shoot, I need to pass in the sales header as a var. Then it says, there's no overload that takes the sales header. Quick fix, add the parameter to the existing procedure or create an overload of the procedure. Well, I'm going to add that. And did I click on it correctly? Add that to the existing. There we go. And so now it adds the sales header there. So Copilot is very helpful, but I feel like there's still a lot of stuff that you will rely on good extensions in Visual Studio Code to speed you along much more efficiently than just accelerated typing will speed you along. Now, I do think that Copilot is going to do pretty good at some of these internal things. Like, for example, I would validate, check if the office has a customer number. Yeah, that's a pretty good check. Check if the customer is blocked. When we give Copilot some context about things, we can also get a little more out of it. I'm not going to write every bit of this validation, but it correctly inferred I probably want the customer here. So that's cool. Yes, I do. You want to check if the customer is blocked. Well, then first we need to customer get customer office customer number. Yep. Cool. Copilot inferring correctly that that's what I would like to do. And now if customer is blocked, then throw an error with the customer name. Now, again, it's learning from base app and look at, it's also learning from history. I won't poke too much fun at my Microsoft friends. It is also learning from historical code. So it just inferred that I probably want error text 000. I don't want text 000. I would have a token. And also, I'm pretty sure blocked these days, as an enum. So I would actually want to do that logic. So if I had accepted its default behavior, like I was a novice who didn't really know the data set yet, it was treating customer.blocked in the old school way where it was potentially a Boolean. And it's not. It's an enum these days. For a period of time, it was an option as well. And then once I rejected its suggestion to treat it as a Boolean, now it's going, okay, there's a comparative here that it's customer blocked does not equal blank then. But again, it's going to give us some nonsense code here and there that if you are unfamiliar with AL, you might think is fine. Here, in this case, it's suggesting we do an exit false after the error. Code execution stops at an error that if that exit is unreachable. So that's not really appropriate either. So mixed bag. There are definitely areas where things speed us along and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to, however, take this very terrible suggestion here because we don't need to begin. We don't need the begin or end. We're going to do a single line error. We will absolutely replace that with a real error because that's just going to bug me. Blocked. Add a local variable label. So I don't want a name either. How would I do number? There we go. So anyways, that's the general flow of at least Copilot in the context of code units. If you give it some context of what you're trying to achieve through procedure names and especially through comments, it will do a phenomenal job of helping you speed along in ways that a lot of extensions might not. So for example, here I'm going to create a sales header of document type invoice and validate the customer. number. Let's see, sales header init. Posting date equals work date. That's interesting. Yeah, I might like that. Posting description equals CC invoice makes no sense at all. So that's terrible. Sales header dot insert. You'll notice that it's doing all assignment statements and that there are potential reasons that you might not want to do that. It also thought that sales header has a customer number, but in fact, sales header has a sell to customer number. It's also doing, as mentioned, it's doing all of these as assignments. I would potentially be like, no, if a rookie or a novice unfamiliar with AL language was trying to come in here and do this exact chunk of code, and they went to someone who knew what they were doing and said, I wrote a function that creates a sales header. And you look at that real quick and you go, oh, well, it's assigning logical fields. Done. Good job. No. Sell to customer number and posting date have a huge amount of validation stuff hooked on them. This would go terribly awry. So Copilot makes code that will pass the compiler, but it will make potential mistakes that need code review. In my scenario, I know, for example, I would want these to be validate 100%. And again, I can refactor that to a validate statement from the AL code actions. So I can go Copilot did it wrong, but at least I can do this part right. You can make some arguments about the sales header validation should happen after the inserts so that the document has a number. There are a bunch of things that Copilot is not going to, at this time, infer correctly for someone who is unfamiliar with the system. And the same is going to be true of some other odds and ends here and there. Like I just casually, without even commenting on it, when I added the sales header to this generate sales header function, added the var because I really wanted to pass back out the values that I'm inserting and all that stuff. So there are still so many places where you do need to know what you're doing because otherwise things will not go very well for you. So now, interestingly, here in generate sales lines, it's copying down the comment that I put before it, almost again as an kind of a mission statement of the function, which if you didn't know, if this wasn't a local procedure, if you're working with it, it's better to throw that in this little documentation comment. And now generate the sales lines for each of the services. The reason for doing the summary before rather than inside like I did here is if we save this and we come up here and we mouse over the tooltip for generate sales line, here's that description that I just put in there. So if you can, using Copilot to put descriptions on procedures, that's good stuff. Using Copilot to generate good descriptions on objects, good stuff. Please do. I think it's a very good thing to do. So what we now need to do is for each of the office services entries for the customer number and office code. I'm curious to see what it will do here. Like, can we potentially get it to help us write a loop? I don't think we can because now it thinks I want to write a list. So let's see. Can we potentially get Copilot to think a loop is our guy? Okay. All right. Alrighty, so for this one, we are going to need to go get all of the office services and potentially create a sales line for each of them. They're all the charges broken out or whatever have you. And this will probably be the last little bit of code that I'm writing for this session. So we will wrap up probably in about 10 minutes or so. It'll give me a couple hours before the one later today where we're going to write some testability around this. Okie dokie. So for this one, we are going to definitely need the var be, hey, that's not too shabby. All right, Copilot, nice. Okay, so it thinks, all right, you know what? Based on what you just told me, we probably want the customer office services and the sales lines. Uh, that's not a bad guess, but I believe we just called it CC Office Services because we're still stuck with 30 character names. So unfortunately, I can't take its reasonably correct supposition around the what else we might need. Okay. But it was correct that we need some sales lines. So now, can we get it to, no. All right. So what we need to do is we need to filter on the office of services. I don't know that we need a reset here. It's a local variable, but let's try. Let's see what happens. Now, it's going to try to filter the, we don't want the office reset. Autocomplete messing me up. We want auto office services. Okay, that makes more sense. I was looking at it going, that seems wrong. All right. Now we're doing the office services based on the customer number and office code. Yes. And if, can you, for what I want to do here? All right. Usually I want to do a find set after a set range. You familiar with that, Copilot, my man? Okay. Sure. All right. Well, at least it tried to fill the auto until for us. Okay. Now, here on this one. Okay. All right. Hey, that's at least now kind of understanding what's going on, that we want to create a sales line for the service in question. So it's suggesting we initialize the sales line, that we want to give it the document type and number of the sales header that's been initialized. It's inferring some stuff about dimensions that we don't have. It's inferring a bunch of stuff about items we don't have. And boy, is it going through a whole lot of things we don't got. And then at least it's trying to validate in the second version of this instead of the assignments that it was doing in the first one. So that's interesting. And then our third option is our Copilot goes wandering down the corridor of looping for everything. I don't know about you folks, but I have thankfully never seen a Business Central system with shortcut dimension 20 code. So our first take on it is closest to right, but I absolutely would not want to encourage it to give me code like this. So we are going to just cruise through some of these things, and we are going to do sales lines init, document type from the header, document number, and then we're going to need to have our own iteration logic around the line number. Doesn't exist, so I can't fault it for not knowing. And then our sales line, we're going to validate this. And as mentioned, I'm going to do a couple things as part of this stream that are not at all best practice, and it pains me to do it. Because I haven't built setup tables, I haven't built item numbers, I didn't specify GL accounts on the cleaning service type and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to do type GL, and I cannot fault Copilot for not knowing what to do with this. Now, interestingly, it's trying to validate the number from the service code. There. I'm just going to temporarily stuff this as a token, GL account token. Had coding practice, 100%. Like I should have set up some setup tables somewhere, but this is what we're doing for right now. Terrible, terrible, terrible practice. Probably the worst crime against development that I've committed on camera. All right. So, and anytime we use next line number, correct, should increment the line number. That's good. And sales line dot validate the quantity to 1, yes. And then sales line dot validate the unit price price on services. Yeah. So there would also need to be some very currency aware logic that here on the sales line, it's in the customer's currency. I've got the unit price set there. So I would potentially want to do some currency conversion stuff, rounding and all that fun things. I'm just going to do sales line insert. Okay, that gives us at least a bare minimum viable product on that one. We do want to up here set next line equal 10,000, just that way we've got a first one in there. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not great. I would be frustrated being handed this code. It's not optimal, but it might be minimum viable product for us to get. Like, say, if we were just trying to hurry through to make something in an hour for a demo, this would be acceptable for hurry through in an hour to make a demo. Okay. Cool. I think that's a pretty good stopping point. The only other thing that I might want to do is maybe create like an office ledger that we could try out. Does Copilot understand creating an event to capture some of the info? But it's going to be pretty similar to a lot of the code unit logic and everything. So, all right. Well, this is just coming up on 2 hours now, which feels like an appropriate amount of time for these sort of things. So I guess the point now would be to do kind of a closing sort of review of like, so how do we feel about how this works and all that sort of thing. And I would say that what I've seen of Copilot is that there are some things that extensions will always do faster because there's a lot of business logic built into it rather than language parsing. There are things that Copilot will do that look right and may even compile that don't pass the first test of basic code review that a developer should be doing before they even hand it to other people. So, as a result, I would say that it's still early. I mean, we all know that Copilot's relatively early in the development cycle of moving forward things, and AL as a language isn't the most well represented in open source code for them to learn from. And there's a lot of history with a lot of older code out there for it to learn from. So as more and more applications become accessible for Copilot to learn from, as the models improve, I think the results will also improve. I think there is still a whole lot of room in the ecosystem for smart extensions. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Waldo. Thank you, David, and a whole bunch of others I'm not mentioning. Europa has a great series where all of these extension authors did like 15-minute talks of what their extensions do. If you haven't looked at those, Europa on YouTube is, you should definitely do that. There is great value in relying on some of the autocomplete logic to make things go faster for you. I think there's never going to be a hard line between what is faster when you're talking about snippets versus the autocomplete from GitHub. I personally write a lot of my snippets for projects and things like that that make sense within the context of that project. I think that is equally valid and efficient. But I will say that Copilot does a bunch of things for me that does make my results better. I document code better. I definitely, whether it be to provide the context for Copilot or not, or to document it for others, I document tooltips and learning actions a lot better. I think it does a phenomenal job with those sort of things. Um, and if you give it enough context and time in a bigger project to understand the types of patterns and habits that you work with, it learns a lot about how you code. And the types of behaviors that you expect. I very carefully and intentionally reset my environment. Today, what you are seeing is you are seeing what Copilot is in its beginning steps, just learning off of basic AL repositories and treating me as a new person using it for the first time. So I think there's a lot of potential there. There are some rough edges that you'll need to learn about. Where does Copilot do a great job, and where does it have some struggles? As we saw, API pages, it really doesn't understand the difference between good page practice and good API page practice yet. Um, but there is a lot of potential good with it. And the more repetitive your code gets, and there's just small permutations and things like that, you will see phenomenal speed increases. And I'm hopeful that in our session this afternoon, later today, and for those of you watching it later, part two, the part two is going to be all about, let's see if we can make some validation and testing around what we generated today. Whether it just be basic stuff of validating customer blockings, are we allowed to do some stuff? So we're probably going to have to add some business logic to what we've generated this morning to enable that. But I have seen personally that when it comes to writing testability, there is a lot of minor variation, and your code grows over time in some big ways. And Copilot has done a phenomenal job for me and my team of learning about testability code and making that easier to write over and over again. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes when it's freshly reset like this one is, and what it can do. So, hopefully, you'll join me for part two. See you, well, later.